Hello everyone, it's Andy Savva and today's subject is labour rates and labour charges. A very interesting topic, a topic that I'm very passionate about, a topic that I believe I'm fairly knowledgeable about, and I'm hoping to share with you the basics of how you calculate your cost in terms of running your garage to enable you to hopefully set your labour charges correctly to give you a better chance of profitability. Now, there's two things that I want to mention before we start the main guts of the video. The first thing is that you need to understand that in a garage environment, labour is the most critical thing for us, because that's the only thing that we charge for, what we sell, what we're there for. You know, time, skill, knowledge, whatever you want to, wherever you want, however you want to dress it up. It's the only commodity that we're in charge of. Now, I've been for years commenting about the parts side of it. Yes, we do sell parts, but parts are a byproduct. We don't have no full control over parts. If we don't sell no labour, we very rarely will sell a part not attached with it. Okay, so labour is critical to the success of our business, and that's why we're going to focus on that right now. I'm going to touch on parts a bit later on towards the end of the video. And specifically about margin and markup and the current marketplace of parts. But for the moment, we want to establish our running costs. Right now, in the group chats that I've seen on social media, especially the last few days, what usually happens is that someone will post an open question, and it will be something like, "I'm trying to work out what I'm charging. Can you let me know what you're charging?" And it goes spiral, and everyone flies in with their own labour rate, but you can't use that as the basis to calculate your labour rate, because everyone's costs, depending on where they are demographically, is completely different. And it depends on how much of this labour you're selling, which has a profound impact on the cost of your labour in the first place. So we're going to cover all those. And I know, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, traditionally and historically, most garages will choose a labour rate that is common within their own given area. So, you know, someone across the road is 50, someone half a mile away is 45, you know, I'm going to pick 47, 50 or 48 pounds. That's not how you set your labour rates. Now, it is important and you have to be aware of what's around you, but there's other things to put to take into consideration. For example, the services that you offer compared to someone else. You have to bear in mind the facilities that you have, the investment that you make or may not be making, the investment in tooling and equipment, training, the staff levels that you've got, the skill levels that you've got. So there's a lot of things that have to be considered. And yes, one of them is what your competitors are doing, but you should never set your individual rates based on what your competitors are doing as a starting point. The basis should be what it costs me to be here in the first instance. And that's why the majority of you that are watching this video now will not be returning anything from your labour charges. You're practically working for nothing. And I guarantee you, if you do this exercise, I'm going to be proven correct in most cases. Maybe up to 80-85% of people in the independent garage sector. The first thing that we have to establish is the total costs of running your garage. So it doesn't matter whether you're a one-man band, whether you are 5, 6 ramps, 12 ramps or 14 ramps like me, or I used to be. We all have fixed costs. Now throughout the year you will have some variable fixed costs. So these are readily available from your P&L, your profit and loss accounts sheet, which you'll get from your accountant. So when I mean total cost, I mean everything that you pay for to put your lights on and open your doors, excluding your parts purchases. These have no relevance to this calculation, because if I open the doors and I don't have any custom, I don't buy no parts, but I still have the costs associated with being open. My rent, my rates, my insurance, accountancy, calibration and everything else, utilities, gas and all that is still part of my costs. And like I said, these are in your profit and loss account. Now, what you do is what you will have in your profit and loss. You'll have your sales for the year, wherever your financial year starts and finishes. You'll have your cost of sales eliminated. That's your parts purchases. And then below that, you will have a whole host of all your expenses. And that's what I'm talking about. So once you've got this figure, then what we're going to do now is work out what it costs you to be there a day, what you have to invoice to be there for the day. And when I say invoicing, I'm talking about just labor sales, no parts involved, okay? Just labor. So we're going to work with this example. What we're saying is 5 days a week. So if you work for 6 days a week or 5.5 days a week, you have to add this to the calculation. So 5 times 52 will give you 260 working days, all right? And the total cost of running this specific business is just over 306,000. So if you divide that into there, you'll get a daily figure of just under £1,200 that you need to invoice to keep you above board. Not to make any money, but just to pay your overheads. Now, 52 weeks is not really realistic because we have holidays, bank holidays, sickness, training days, and everything else. So a more realistic measurement is 48 weeks. Now, in my business, when I used to run my garages, I worked on a 46-week cycle, but 48 is not a bad starting point. Again, you have to be honest with yourself in terms of your opening hours, okay? So what we've got here, we've got reduced hours to still earn the same amount of money. So my daily invoicing has gone up by nearly £100. If you did 46 weeks on this measurement, it will probably go up another sort of £50–60. So we know now that we need to generate labour invoicing of that amount pre-VAT just to keep us afloat, okay? What we now have to do, and a lot of people use that calculation, but it's not, that's the starting point. What we have to do is measure labour individually because that's how we sell it. We sell labour as an hour unit, time, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, because they're the repair times. So you need to know what that labour costs you in order to be able to sell it at a profit. So this example is showing you that for one technician, he's there for 48 weeks in the year. He works 40 hours a week. So if you times those two, you will get a figure of 1,920 hours. So in theory, he could invoice, or we can invoice for him or her, for that matter, 1,920 hours. All right? So that's a very simplistic start. Now we move on to the next stage, which is we've added another couple of scenarios. So it's the same business, the costs. So what you'll see here is we've got 4 technicians now. So it's 1,920 hours per tech times 4, which gives you an overall figure of 7,680. Now, what we do now, our fixed costs, we know what they are. We've established what they are. So you write down 306,576 and you divide that by the total number of hours that you have available. And then you will get your cost per hour if, assuming you sold 100% of those hours. So if you sold every hour for every technician, your cost of being there is £40 an hour. But that's not realistic. Of course it's not, because there's no garage in the world that will sell every hour. All right. So this is where it gets interesting. So in this scenario, what I've anticipated is that we've sold 87.5% of the total hours that we had available. So what you do, you get the total hours that are available, 7,620, times that by 87.5%, and that will give you the new figure, which is 6,720. So we've invoiced 6,720. That's what we've invoiced. And if you divide that new figure into the same cost, because our costs are the same, we're still paying for the same people, and our rent's the same, our rate's the same, what we'll find is that our cost of labour per hour has shot up by over £5 an hour. And that's been at 87.5%. Now, I'll guarantee you another thing. is that most of you will not be at 87.5%. I'm going to come to where I think you're going to be. All right. Now, what we can do here as well is if we then calculate 7680, if we times that by say £50 an hour, you could potentially have a revenue of labour sales for the year of £384,000. That's the potential, but we know that ain't going to happen. Now, we can use the hours that we've invoiced. Now, bearing in mind that if you charge £50 an hour, you're probably not recovering £50 an hour. You're probably recovering around £41, £42. Okay, because not every hour is sold at 50 quid, especially if you're doing MOTs for less the amount, or you're giving discounts or whatever else. So the recovery rate is actually more important than the labour rate itself. But we're just keeping things simple now. So what we do is 6720 times 50. It gives us a revenue of £336,000. So this should be in your accounts, or it should be in your garage management system. Okay. Now what we can do is use the actual, which is 336, divided by the possible, which is 384,000. And if you times that by 100, you will get 87.5%. So it's the reverse calculation. Okay, very simple. So you can see that, not too hard. Now we get to the real stuff. Now this example is what the average independent UK garage is at 55%. All right. I guarantee you, all of you that are hopefully watching this video, you're going to be between 45 and 65% in terms of the hours that you're selling compared to the possible hours you could sell, assuming you measure this figure correctly. Now, so the average that I'll find is 55%. So basically you have 100 hours to sell and you're only selling 55 of those. Not a good place to be, because what that does, you'll see in a second, it drives the cost of your labour drastically upwards rather than downwards. Okay. And so we've got 55%. So now the original 7680 figure, you times that by 55%, you will get a new figure for your hours, which is 4224. And if you have your costs are still the same, we just haven't sold those extra hours. So you divide that into that, and then you get a new cost, which is an astonishing £72 an hour. And trust me when I say to you that if you do this calculation correctly and your figures are tight, you're not going to be far off from that 55%. Obviously, if your costs are lower than that, then that cost of labour will drop down too. All right, okay. Now, I can also then do the further calculation, which is working out my total revenue, which is £50 times the 4224, which gives me the new revenue, which I think is £211,200. And again, if you do the actual divided by the possible, you then get your 55%. Again, it's that reverse calculation. Now, some of you are going to be thinking, how do I work out my overall efficiency? How do I get that figure? Well, it's fairly simple. You can do two ways. If you're selling your hours on your database as individual hours, just look and see how many hours you've sold. And then you can work out how many hours you have available, like we have in this scenario. And then you divide one into the other and you get your percentage. So it's not that difficult. Or the other way you can do it is if you take your total labour sales. So if we say you've done £180,000 of labour sales, right, in the whole year. Now that could be MOT sales as well. And if you divide that by, say, the possible of 384,000, so 180 you've done, you've invoiced, and you could have done 384,000. You will find if you divide one by the other and times it by 100, you'll get to about 46%. All right, so that's another way of doing it. So either by new numbers, hourly numbers, or by the figure that's already in your database because you've already invoiced them. But that's not a good place to be. I've seen many businesses that are below 50%. I've seen very rarely businesses that are over 65% that have measured it correctly. Now, there's another two important points here which can distort these figures, right? And this is what it is. A lot of you will have fixed price servicing or a fixed price job. So I'm going to give you two examples that really stick out very commonly. So if you do brake fluid changes, and let's say you charge something like £50 plus the VAT for a brake fluid change, so the total £60. In that £50 fee, there will be a content of parts, which is your lubricants, which is your brake fluid, say £10, and the rest of it will be your labour, £40. Now, what usually happens is that a lot of people will pick one nominal code in your database, so either 4,000 for labour or 4,001 for parts, and that whole job goes into that labour nominal code of 4,000. So what happens, it distorts the figures, because what you're adding is you're adding a parts value into the labour content. So it'll increase your labour sales and it will make you look like you're selling more hours than you should be, because it's one unit and you've added the brake fluid change in there. On the reverse, if you take something like an air conditioning job, where the gas, this time the parts are the more prominent, if you added, say, if you were charging £70 for the gas, I'm just, rounding things off, £70 or £80 for the gas, or £20, £30 for the labour, because it's a bit more automated, and you were charging £100 plus the VAT, then what will happen is if you put all that into 4001, which is parts, again, it will distort your figures, because what you're doing, you're putting the labour content, even though if it's a small part of it, into the parts. So it will make it look like you're making more on your parts, you're retrieving more on your parts sales than you truly are. Now I've learned over the years in what I'm doing to work backwards. When I see figures that are distorted, I've worked out ways of analysing and digging deep on people's financial data, DNA, and working out the true figures. And what that's told me is that the average labour parts mix across the whole country, so this is a very, very important figure when you're working out these kind of statistics, is 50-50. It's actually the other way around. It's actually so what I mean by that is if you invoice something for £100, what usually happens is that it's £50 labour and £50 parts. In actual fact, it's more parts than labour, and usually £55 is the parts and £45 is the labour in that context. And you can do it over a 3-month period, 4-month period, the whole year. And obviously I do it for the whole year, right? Because I want to get the nice labour mix ratio. Now, where you should be aiming for is a 60-40 split. 60% labour and 40% of the value of that invoice should be on parts. And the reason why that should be is that if you're in that ratio, it means you're selling more of your labour and you're selling more value of that labour. And the reason why currently in most garages it's the other way around is because you're not selling enough labour and you're not charging enough for it in the first instance. So the parts always seem to overtake slightly. So what you want to be aiming for is a 60-40 labour parts mix. Okay, so there are ways that you work out your overall efficiencies, and it will help you work out the cost of actually being there. And you don't want to be in this scenario, yeah, which is, but that's the average. 55% is the average of what I see. It's very rare for me to see something over 65%. Now at Brunswick, we were running near 92% week in, week out towards the end. Tremendous. And I'm not going to go into how you can create capacity, because I'll be here all week. That's the skill set that I have. Creating efficiencies to create the capacity to sell more hours. You can create the capacity, but if you haven't got the footfall, then it makes no difference. So what I want to get to now is I'm going to show you another statistic now. And so the average cost of labour in the work that I've been doing for years around the UK garage industry, the average cost of labour per hour in most establishments is 48 quid, right? £48. Now that's astonishing when you think that the average labour rate is £50, okay? So, and I work on margin, not markup. And I always used to base my labour rates on a bare minimum of 40% margin. Now, when I started back in 2010, my original labour rate was £88 an hour. and people thought I was crazy. They thought, you'll never fill up the garage, you'll go bust. Obviously I was a bit fearful, but £88 it had to be to give me a chance to survive. And it wasn't because it was the going rate in the area, because everyone else was around 35, 40 quid then. All right, so that's where it is. So if you work out your cost per hour based on your individual figures, and let's say you came to 48 quid and you wanted to earn a 40% margin, you have to divide that figure by 0.6 to get you your £80 an hour. If you wanted to earn a 50% margin, you divide your cost per hour by 0.50, and then you get to 96, is it? Yep. And if you wanted to earn a 60% margin, you divide the cost of your labor per hour by 0.6 to get you 120 quid. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wow, I can't, Andy's showed me how to work out my cost per hour. I'm £48 or 45 or 46 or 40. I can't go in tomorrow and start charging 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 pound. It doesn't work that way. Of course it doesn't work that way. That's real life. I understand that more than anyone. But, so what you've got to decide is, you have to decide yourself the services that you offer, the type of customers you want to attract, what you're doing with your business in general. And you can't just put your prices overnight and expect people to come and pay for the same service and experience, but pay another 20, 30 quid an hour extra. It doesn't work. So the only way you can increase your labor revenue is two ways. Either you sell more hours, or you sell that hour for more money. So for me, the best combination is the two together. A bit of this and a bit of that, improve your business and slowly stagger your labor rates up. And remember, very few customers will call you and say to you how much you charge per hour. They usually call you and ask you for a quote or an estimate, and it's how you put that estimate together and how you convey that message across, whether you get the job or not. All right, so knowing your cost of labor is critical, because that's the only thing that we control. Now I'm going to touch parts quickly, because parts over the last couple of years, our parts that we get, the marketplace has completely changed to when I was running garages. So I always used to aim for a minimum of 40% margin across the whole board. Obviously on some parts we earned more and some less, but across the board I wanted to aim for about 40% margin. Today that's very, very difficult, and it's difficult because online consumers having access to parts that we were buying at similar prices, which is ridiculous. And it's strange and it's funny that the consumers that we serve go into a restaurant, they order a bottle of wine for £30. They know that that wine's cost that restaurant £10, but they're happy to pay for it. But when they come into a garage, yeah, and we charge them £50 for a set of brake pads, they turn around and say to us, oh, I can get that for £28. Can you fit it for me? No, my friend. Thank you very much. There's the door. Go somewhere else. So, those days are here now. They're here. So it's become very difficult for us as garage owners to make the margins that we used to 2-3 years ago, which makes it even more imperative and critical that we make a return on our labor. It's fundamentally key that that's the resource that's going to keep us going, labor. And I'm going to give you a statistic now, and I guarantee you, again, most of you watching this video will be in this position. What happens usually is, if you take 500 grand a year, £500,000, let's say you took 250 of labor and you invoiced 250 grand's worth of parts. Those parts would have cost you approximately 190,000 to 200,000 pounds. So you've made 50 to 60,000 pounds profit on parts. When you look at your accounts at the end of the year, you see a profit of 25,000. You think, hang on a minute, but I've made 50 grand. And this is where I get really irate with accountants, because no one sees it. I have to point it out. So you make 50 grand on your parts, but you're only making 25 grand in total. What does that work out? It works out because what's happening, the labor revenues that you have for the whole year are not enough to cover your costs. So your 250 that you're invoicing, your costs are 306,000. So you're losing 50 grand. You're working for nothing. And the only thing that's just about keeping you alive is that parts profit, which gets eaten into the running of your business. You can't work like that. You have to make a margin on the cost of your labor. So if your expenses for being there are 250 grand, you have to make 300 grand. If your expenses are 300 grand, you have to make 350 grand. Otherwise, your parts profit will disappear. And it's disappearing for the other reasons I've just spoken about. You know, the attack that we have from third parties who want to supply us parts now. Everyone wants to supply us parts and take the cream on top of the cherry. So that's why it's imperative that you've got to focus on your labor. Now, one last thing, markup or margin. Always margin for me, and I will tell you why. You buy a part for £72, you want to earn yourself a 40% margin. So you've sold the part at 120 quid. You've made £48. So you divide 48 actual, same calculation as before with labor and parts, to what you're selling, and you will get 40%. Look at the difference when you mark something up. The same brake pad, £72, markup, which is what most people do. So you've marked it up by 40%. You've now made a selling price of £100 and 80p. So you've only made 28 quid. 28 over £100 and 80p is 28% margin, okay? So now you see the difference between markup and margin. And I used to have a margin on specific product groups, and we stuck to it. So regardless of who answered the phone to give a quote, it's preset. That's what we do here. So it's not a matter of guessing, oh, he's put 30%, I'm putting 40%. Doesn't matter. It makes a big difference. And underneath, I've done a small calculation, which just says to you that if you want to earn a 25% margin on your parts or tires or whatever else you want to sell, then you divide that by 0.75. So whatever it costs you, as long as you divide it by 0.75, you will always get a retail, and you will always maintain that 25% margin. 30% is 0.7, and so on and so on and so on. So this is very important. And as I explained earlier, the cost of actually, the ability to make a bigger margin now in parts is decreasing. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Again, you've got to think about your business overall, the type of customers that you want to attract. And that's why I've always been a big advocate the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years since I started it. Being a specialist gives you a far better opportunity to increase your labor rates and also become more efficient in your garage, because you're doing the same work all the time. So you become quicker, you become aware of more common problems. If you're trying to do everything for everyone, you dilute yourself. And one of the common things that you'll get, and why people can't sell more than about 50-55% of their hours, is this. A car comes in, fairly complex issues, diagnostic issues, whatever else. You spend three and a half hours on the car, in and out, test driving this, that and the other, software updates, whatever. And then you come to invoice and you only invoice like 2 hours because you're afraid. You're shitting yourself that you can't charge 3.5 hours. So we give our labor away. And that's why we can never get over that 60-65% efficient. All right. And when your fixed costs are fixed and you get over that threshold and you do that extra 10-15%, it makes a big difference to the cost of your labor. It comes down dramatically and hopefully will retain more profit in your business. All right. So you've got to be proud about the services that you offer. The independent garage sector generally we're honest people, hardworking people. And I believe it's time that we start earning the right return for the effort, the stress and the skill levels that we have to employ every day to get us through. And obviously now with the crisis that we have at hand, it's even more challenging. And our capacity now is going to reduce. I can't see this demand that everyone's talking about. So now it's going to be even worse for us because we have to work spaced out. People can't come into reception. The dynamics of the garage industry has changed, and even more critical to fight for the parts margins that we should justifiably have. And also maybe it's the time now to think about raising our prices to bear the costs of us being there. And it could also be an opportunity to maybe start a campaign, which I'm interested in doing, in having the MOT fixed, at least £70-75. It hasn't gone up for 10 years, and all the onus has gone on the garage owner to invest in computers and training and everything else. And yet people use it as a bargaining tool to get people through the door, and we're giving it away. So it should be cemented, set in law. You cannot use it as a bargaining tool. You cannot throw it as part of a service. You cannot give it as part of an offer. It's a fixed price, at least £70, and let's have a fair, level playing field for those who are invested in MOT stations. And to be frank, there's too many MOT stations as well. So that's something maybe for the future. Anyway, look, I've gone on a little bit. Really happy to have done this. I hope you all keep safe and well. Please stay positive. We're all in this, you know, it's not isolated to a district or a borough. The whole bloody country and the whole world's in it. So, and some industries are worse than us. Look at the travel industry. So we're about in the middle, I reckon. So God bless you all. Thank you very much, and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.